Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leonard Live Lounge. Today I'm joined by Zeno Capucci. He is the Chief Legal and Risk Officer at Docplanner. We will be discussing all things Chief Legal Officer, the evolution of the role, and how Zeno's been finding that over the years that he's been with Docplanner as well. How are you doing, Zeno? How are you doing?
Hi, Faye. I'm good, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. It's good to see you as well.
Yes, no, it's good. It's a good opportunity for us to catch up, and very grateful for you taking the time to do this. We've got some vague structure here, but I thought we'll kind of see how we go with this. There's a few topics we want to cover. In the interest of efficiency, I suppose I'll dive straight into one of the first things I wanted to ask you. And there's two parts to this. I was interested to know how you feel that the CLO roles evolved in and of itself over the last kind of 5 years, both in terms of from an industry perspective, but actually also for you personally and your position there at Docplanner.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question because I think the last 5 years have been wild everyone knows, right? From a geopolitical, global technology, investment landscape perspective. So I think that the chief legal role and the general counsel role in general, any senior lawyer, has really followed the times in a way. If you consider the situation we were in 5 years ago, we're talking about before the pandemic. And since then, we've had pandemic, we've had a tech stock slump for people working in my sector. Docplanner is a digital company. We've had wars, we've had tariffs now, geopolitical uncertainty. So I think for companies that needed and need that type of sort of strategic management of downside protection, of handling risk and opportunities coming from the regulatory geopolitical framework in a strategic way, I think that is the role of the chief legal officer, senior lawyer within a company has really become much more strategic and more important. Those companies that are heavily regulated or operate internationally and that are exposed to this type of risk need a different level of input and a different level of expertise almost constantly in order to navigate the waters these companies are finding themselves in. So from my perspective, if you join a company, or when I joined a company, knowing that it was a company operating within the healthcare sector, within the digital world, which is heavily regulated, I knew that the need for a lawyer, for a legal and risk person within that company wasn't necessarily just a need for someone who was simply to take care of contracts or to take care of writing policies and then leave it there and let the company run with it. But it will need a little bit of more of a strategic hands-on input on the direction of the company. And I think this is true for everyone who's in a similar position and who's joined a company that is somehow exposed to these external factors. So I think the role has evolved in a more strategic direction, more similar to probably what was already the case on the other side of the pond, for example, in the US. I think you start seeing more and more chief legal officers in Europe taking more of a broader role, taking care of ESG, sustainability, public affairs, lobbying, regulatory oversight, having more of a loud voice at board level with investors, with within the management team as well. I think that's true for one type of lawyer. I think on the flip side, if companies hire lawyers just thinking we need someone to deal with contracts, someone to deal with simple policy drafting, like simple tasks, I think the role has changed in a slightly different direction, meaning is becoming probably a little bit more redundant. Another massive change over the last 5 years, I think, is technology. And there's a lot of the stuff like basic legal research, drafting, reviewing contracts that can actually be successfully automated with external tools. Some companies have started to build their own internal legal tools to actually review contracts. So when it comes to, it really depends, I think, on whether the reason why a company needs a lawyer in the first place. And for many companies, there's plenty of reasons why you need this type of expertise at a strategic level to shape the direction of the business and make sure that the business stays within the acceptable level of risk for the company's risk appetite. But for many other companies, it might be that if the reason to hire a lawyer was to churn contracts on a sort of daily basis at big volumes, you don't need that big of a legal team anymore. So interesting path for the lawyers of the future, I think, to really define what they're good at and what they should be focusing on. I mean, in a nutshell, I think that over the last 5 years, the role has become more exciting, but probably more stressful at the same time, because you're really
Yeah.
bombarded with different inputs, emergencies, dealing with changes of directions within the company, but also coming from outside the company and the business sector, strictly speaking. So it's really a role that is keeping me on my toes and everyone expects
Yeah.
me as well. Like we're not getting bored.
No, definitely. I'd echo that from my conversations as well. I think it's interesting. Even the title element here is interesting. And where you mentioned the US, I think it's a really helpful comparison. You know, I do a decent chunk internationally, and it's really helpful to see the kind of, I guess, maturity levels of different in-house, of in-house legal across different markets. And that CLO title, it's existed in the UK for some years. It has, but I'm seeing it more widely used in the last 3, 4, 5, and it's been a really helpful way, by definition, to showcase the strategic nature of the role that general counsel doesn't always do, partly through job title inflation that we absolutely see in the market as well, and because there's no rules on this, it can be used very interchangeably. And I think that's something that again you see to help really define where this role is going. And to your other point, I think you're spot on. It depends why this role came about in the first place, and also, frankly, what you as individuals do with it when you're in post. Most businesses that I work with their first hires, they will nearly always have been prompted by some combination of high external legal spend. We think we can bring some of this specific legal work in house, or something's happened, some litigation, or some kind of macro thing that they're worried about and thinks that we need more oversight on this. And then once someone's in post, 3 months in, 4 months in, they go, oh, it's amazing. It turns out our lawyer can help us with all of this stuff as well. And they're over here, and they're actually getting involved in the legal, the strategy of the business. And you're like, yeah, this is it. This is exactly what it was always going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I think the title in itself is a good sign of the times in a way. Is a good symptom. But at the end of the day, what matters is the substance. I mean, you can call me chief legal officer, you can call me general counsel, you can call me legal honcho, or sort of
Whatever you, yeah,
head of legal, which some people think, oh, it's not that good. At the end of the day, is what you really do, and is what the company needs on the one side. I think spot on what you said is what the company needs. And sometimes the company doesn't know what it needs up to a certain point, which I think is absolutely fair, and is also the value that you're able to add to the company as a person, and then your team, as an expression of the function, can add to the business as a whole. I mean, my personal journey is interesting because I joined Docplanner as first central legal hire. I mean, there were a few lawyers in the business, some of which are still with us, but they were mostly dedicated to their own sort of local country's jurisdiction, and quasi-external in a way, the type of relationship they had. But there wasn't a sort of central coordinated legal function. And the reason why I joined was basically to fix things, given the company had gotten to a certain scale, and clean things up. And it was actually it was on the initiative of the board, so of some investors rather than of the management team, to say you guys actually need to start centralizing things because you're doing the basics right, but maybe you're not really bringing that oversight that as a company within the digital healthcare space you need, right? So at the beginning, I joined a company that, I mean, maybe this is an exaggeration, but that didn't really want me. And that wasn't the feeling, because Docplanner wanted a lawyer, bought into the story, but they really didn't know much
what
of
it
what we
was.
were getting into, and they didn't really feel,
Yeah.
oh yes, we really need a strong legal function, right? I think some people will tell you, and I've heard it before, like never join a company unless there's 100% buy-in from the CEO and the management team. And I think that's very valid and solid advice, but every case is different. And I think at the end of the day, it's also difficult to expect a founder-led company with founders that have rarely worked that closely with senior lawyers, especially at this scale. Maybe they've just had external counsel, or they've had to deal with ad hoc issues, but never on a strategic level, to really want something that they never had, to really understand the value of it.
Yes.
And so it's a matter of showing value add gradually and getting your role to the to the level the organization needs it, not necessarily to the level you want it to be, because that's kind of pointless, but to kind of start adding value and then show that the value you can add is actually more than what they initially expected. And then ideally, if you're in a healthy organization and if everything is going well around the organization as well, your role can evolve with the organization and can evolve throughout the years, which is exactly what happened to me as well. I joined as a general counsel at the time, reporting to the CFO to fix things and basically get a bit of a cleaner setup from a legal perspective. But then fast forward 5 years in, I'm a board secretary, I'm reporting to the CEO directly, and I'm involved in direct conversation with board members, investors. We've done lots of M&A, which the legal team, on some of which the legal team has led on, funding rounds, complex strategic product launches. There's so many different things, very different from what probably they expected, probably different from what initially I expected, although I could see the potential. But there wasn't a conversation during my interview with Marius, the CEO, about how much strategic contribution can you give. At that point, it was more, are you commercial enough? Are you going to slow us down? How do you think you can solve the sort of I cannot sleep at night issue of data privacy and cybersecurity and so on? So it was more specific, and then over time it evolved.
Yeah, which is exactly how these things go. And look, at the core here, as we know, it's the relationships. It's the relationships with the management team and how you build those. And I agree with you. I think for anyone looking at something new, especially where it's a newly created position, you do have to look very carefully at how bought in is the management team to this. You know, what was the driver, and what do they really feel about it? And you get that from the kinds of questions they're asking, or what they perceive this initial piece of the role to be. And then it's frankly looking at your own skill set and say, well, this is where I think I'm going to build it out, and this is the direction we want to take it in. Even that reporting line, it's an interesting one. Again, we see that it's very common that initial hire is often a CFO reporting line. And fundamentally, I think that's driven from the fact that legal work has actually ultimately sat on their desk pre-bringing someone in, because they're the one managing, at least fiscally, what they're doing with external counsel, and therefore having a view on it, where the CEO either doesn't have the bandwidth or the view on it. And that naturally tends to progress and filter and change as well. But it's all about the relationships you build, I think.
And I wouldn't be too hung up on the reporting line, at least initially. I mean, some people are, and I think, that I'm not necessarily saying that people who say I will never report to anyone but the CEO are wrong, because I do understand that for some companies, listed companies, certain businesses is important as well. But at the same time, I do think it really depends on the personal relationship, and it really depends on how their reporting line works in practice. I mean, for many years within my role, I kept reporting to the CFO, but then in reality, I mean, the exposure was there, and to the board and the CEO, and the CFO was treating me like a peer. I was treating him like a peer. So the relationship, like, the important thing is, as some people say, is having the ear of the CEO, the management team, the board, and so on. At some point, I guess, if that is the real relationship, you want it to be reflected on paper as well. So you want maybe for the reporting line to change. Is also, I think, healthier from an optical perspective, external speaking, governance. So there are definitely some points to be made for that reporting line to be directly into the CEO or to the board. But I mean, at the same time, like, what really matters is the substance. You may be reporting to a CEO that never wants to hear from you, and then how does that help you, or more importantly, the company in achieving its objectives? Right?
I agree, and again, it's about the kind of allies you have going in. That's where sometimes that CFO reporting line can be really helpful, because if the CEO is less, what's the phrase? Let's say they're less visible on legal, and maybe that initial inclination is they want to remain that way. And actually, it's the CFO that helps to kind of bring you in as part of that, and then build it up. At the same time, I do understand the viewpoint for good governance and competing priorities. If you're sat in a hierarchy and it's slightly different there, it does ultimately put legal, which objectively has to take priority at points as well. It can put that at odds with financial pressures as well, and obviously that's something you balance every day, I'm sure, as well. But it's an interesting point. I wanted to ask as well, as we discussed at the start, things have changed a lot over the last 5 years, macro, but also micro for you guys and your company. What are the biggest pressures, I guess, in your role now, and how do those differ from the pressures you had when you started?
Some of them are different because the world has changed a lot. So the first one that I would say is a I mean, I will use a sentence that one of my colleagues, esteemed colleagues, Andy Cook at Travelperk, loathes this. He really doesn't like it. He almost went on a campaign to abolish it, and I agree because I don't like the sound of it. But there's some reality to it, which is doing more with less, right? With like
Yeah,
you especially in a business that is a tech business, is a growth company that really has a push to become more and more efficient over time and working a lot with technology and innovation, you are pushed to keep up the pace with the rest of the business, at least, if not to outpace the rest of the business in terms of the way you manage your functions. So from a purely management perspective, I think legal teams, and I think rightfully so, are starting to be treated as all the other functions. So you need to manage your own budget efficiently. The answer to increase workload cannot be automatically new hires, but it needs to be more creative than that. I mean, there are
yeah,
companies out there, like think of Shopify. I think 1 month ago they came out saying, in order to justify a new hire, or before you can hire someone, you need to justify and prove that AI cannot automate it.
can't do
That's an
it.
extreme approach to an extent, and it wasn't specific to legal, but I think that's true for us as well to an extent. The answer to increasing complexity and workload cannot necessarily be new hires. So I think you need to be, again, a little bit more strategic and a little bit more driven and deliberate in the way which you shape the legal function of the future. I mean, let's be honest. I think if we were to rebuild Docplanner in 2025, or I think any company, versus 2012, which is when Docplanner was initially started, we wouldn't build it in the same way, and we probably wouldn't build the legal function and everything around it in the same way either, right? So that's that sort of senior management perspective of how do you run an efficient team that has changed massively, and that's a pressure, but it's also a challenge. And then, as we mentioned before, I mean, the world around us has changed from other perspective as well. So there's been sanctions, there's been regulatory. Regulatory, I wouldn't even call it regulatory increase. I think is almost an overburdening of regulation over companies. Like I think since 2018, I attended a presentation from an external law firm, and they were showing that since 2018 at European Union level only, so not considering member states and not considering outside of the European Union, there have been 18 new different regulations or directives or pieces of legislation that digital companies need to comply with, starting from GDPR, but then going on to DSA, DMA, and this is just European Union level. And then you have member
Yeah,
states, you have the UK, you have US, you have all the other countries you operate in. So from that perspective, navigating that regulatory complexity, the fragmentation that you have within the regulatory landscape has become more complex and requires a different solution than simply going out to external counsel and get ad hoc advice. So from a certain perspective, I think that what's on my plate is on the management side, like different because it's more deliberate and more driven towards efficiency. And on the other side, it's become more complex and more multifaceted. Something hasn't changed, and I think I don't want it to change, which is you still need to be a good lawyer at the end of the day. I think you still need to master
yeah,
your skills, own your craft, and you should never become a manager full stop. You stop doing the work altogether, also because you will become unable to judge the quality of the people around you that are actually doing more of the work. Like, so from that perspective, I think it's essential that you continue doing contract negotiations every now and then, looking at understanding the law, looking at what's happening within the business, really being close to the detail, because otherwise you won't be able to counsel effectively. And at the same time, I think it's fair, right? You cannot really tell other people in your team, even if you start having a bigger team, like what to do without necessarily understanding the challenges and trying to do it yourself every now and then. So I think certain things in a healthy organization should never necessarily change to the point where a C-level or a like senior manager of a big team doesn't do and doesn't necessarily know what other people in his team do to the level of detail that is needed. Not micromanaging, but staying close to the detail. A fine line, right? Is
It's
difficult.
100%, and it's a really hard balance, but it's a really important point. Nearly every senior lawyer that I've ever spoken to, when you talk about this kind of, I guess we're talking, split between strategic and operational, and you've got to remain in some senses within the detail, because you're right. As soon as you lose that connection to it, it's first, it's very hard to get it back. And also it does mean that you can potentially lose sight on what you're trying to do at a strategic level if you're not also in the detail. And part of that, I imagine, as well, is surrounding yourself with good lawyers in your team too, and knowing when's the right time to step in on something. And it's not just because it's particularly complex or strategic, but because it makes sense in that scenario to get involved and to see it. I think it's always a fine balance, but a really important one. To your other point as well, that phrase, do more with less, that has been bandied around. It was a very convenient excuse over 2023 and parts of 2024, especially, when legal team budgets just seems to kind of shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink, and the regulatory frameworks are getting more and more complex. The workflow was getting bigger and bigger, and by the way, at the same time, junior candidates were getting more and more expensive. So you got even less for your money, frankly, and you're just having to kind of make it work. And I think the AI thing is. It's great. The AI thing, it's great, but it's this misnomer that they go, well, I can't, you can just, there'll be some tech solution and you can do that and it can fix it. But it's all, yes, if you can find efficiencies, great. But ultimately, workflows increased, funding had been decreasing, certainly not increasing, and that tightened things up. I'd like to think, maybe very naively or optimistically, we are kind of coming out the other side of that. We're seeing I'm hearing less. We're being stretched. We're not being given any sort of extra resource, or I'm not just talking about headcount here, but just some kind of investment in the function. We do seem to be kind of coming out the other side. I don't know if you agree. I feel like we're starting to come out the other side of that a little bit.
I think when it comes to hiring, I think we will definitely need humans within a legal team.
I hope so. It'd be a bit of a problem for me if not.
But I think we probably need. I mean, we're starting to see the need for maybe different types of talent. I mean, different. Maybe the types of talent is the same, because at the end of the day, you end up needing curious people. You end up needing people who are happy to get their hands dirty, but also happy to understand the business, the sector, and strategy. So the fundamental skill set is the same, but they need maybe to apply it in a different way, right? And to be people that are switched on to doing things in a different way, relying on technology, knowing the technology landscape, being able to play with it. I'm not saying lawyers need to be able to vibe code, but I'm saying that they need to be decent at prompting, for example, an AI tool. So I think you still need a human at the end of the equation, especially at this stage where AI and technology in general is not perfect, hallucinating a lot. There are certain things that, unfortunately, I'm saying, even myself, I still have to do very manually. But I think is maybe becoming more difficult to hire the right talent, and you need to pay more attention to it. But it's become much more important as well. So I think a solid recruitment process, and this is a conversation I've been having with many in-house lawyers over the last few months. Like, how do you manage legal teams that are increasingly getting more dispersed, with remote work, more diverse in terms of like generational gaps, and having to rely on technology? And this is a challenge. So hiring the right person and onboarding the right person in the right way becomes more crucial than it was maybe in 2020 and 2021. Or before 2020 and 2021. Then we had that period that you mentioned where maybe there was a bit of over-hiring in a way, over-optimism, especially within my sector, in the tech sector. And now I think we're reassessing and we're getting probably to the right medium. But I mean, counter-argument to that, there are companies nowadays, and I'm not speaking about legal, that are going from 0 to 100 million revenue in 4 months with 10 people within the company. And obviously they are not regulated entities, not for now. They will probably need a lawyer 2 years down the line with the AI Act or other legislation around the Act, of course. But you start seeing a different mindset around how you build a company in 2025. And I think it will be naive for us lawyers not to acknowledge that that's happening and starting to think, how do I follow that trend while keeping humans at the center of it?
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's complexity to that. And look, it's always, of course, I'm going to sit here and say it's always a complex and difficult thing when you're looking to hire, because ultimately you have a box you're trying to fit, and then you've got to fit a person within it. But I think it is foundationally more challenging now when you're looking at that, because the considerations are just very different. Gone are the days where you go, well, I'm lawyer number one, and lawyer number two needs to be a sort of junior mid-level commercial generalist that can do a bit of this and a bit of that, and I'll give them that. And okay, if you're a listed entity, there's going to be some COSEC pieces in there. If it's if it's a regulated entity, you want them to be in space and in sector. Now actually it's much more holistic, because you're looking at, well, regionally, probably things are a bit more complex as well. So you need some more international experience, and all these things. They need to be good at prompting. They need to be really into these tools. They need to be curious, and that, I think, that's always been a case in house. But
Yeah.
I think even more important now than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. Couldn't agree more.
And to give you an example, at Docplanner, we do have a software engineer, so a product person within the legal team. We have
Yes.
a legal ops person within the team, so she's not legally qualified, obviously she's got legal experience, but she's dedicated to operations and efficiency. And it's not even that big a legal team. I mean, overall, I think we're short of 30 people. We're not massive, but I think those two roles add tremendous value to the team, because they are looking at things from a different perspective, of helping lawyers upskill, curious lawyers upskill on their technology and understanding on efficiencies and operations, right? So you start seeing these more and more. You start seeing legal teams who have software engineers within the team. You start seeing legal teams that have people who have nothing to do with sort of like traditional legal skills. Legal engineers, like our previous legal ops person transitioned to another company with the title of legal engineers, which is what is like 5 years ago, you probably haven't
Yeah, it
had
wouldn't.
that title at all, right? So I think
Absolutely.
the world is evolving. Humans are fundamental. The fundamental skill set is still the same, as you say, curiosity and willingness to get your hands dirty, and also strategic outlook. But at the end of the day, maybe the way you apply those skills is changing, and therefore hiring becomes more. It needs to be. It needs to be much more deliberate in what you're looking for, and probably more difficult as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think this is foundational, and it's not going anywhere. And if anything, it will continue to get more complex too.
So
Absolutely.
kudos to you. It's not a difficult. It's not an easy space.
I wasn't going to say it, but no,
Well done, you.
I think what's great is, as an industry, everything pushes itself. Would say this very openly. Your talent team, the improvements that they've made over time, looking at legal as your function gets more sophisticated, and how they can support in that. And again, that pushes my industry to, it really has to be kind of best in service with that. The whole point of us being around is it's when there are those particularly niche, tricky, complicated, or ones that just frankly just need that real investment of time that sometimes those teams won't have. But it's good. It keeps us on our
More and more,
toes.
right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's and again, it all flows with the markets too. But as things continue to kind of build and rebuild, this is one of those specialisms where I think there's always going to be, touchwood, there's always going to be a need and a calling for it. There was one other thing. I'm conscious of your time as well, but I could happily talk to you all day about this. But there was one thing I really wanted to ask. Some of our listenership. There's a lot of GCs that tune into this, but we'll get, senior counsels and kind of early heads of legal as well that are looking at this next role and looking at this step up. And it's always really helpful to get some insight from someone that's been there, that's kind of been through it, that's built something. And without trying to narrow it down too much, I was interested in what's one piece of advice, if you could go back, start right at the start, day one at Docplanner, and knowing everything that you know now, what's one piece of advice that you would give yourself at that point that you think would be really helpful, kind of taking through where your career's gone?
I mean, it's a good question. I think that there's probably a few. I probably condense it into three. So number one is you were right. If I was speaking to myself like 5 years ago, you were right in sweating the small stuff and trusting your instincts a little bit. I mean, you'll
Yeah.
hear a lot of like different opinions and how uh, different people have approached a similar role, or different people within your organization think about stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a bit of a lonely role, and some people may tell you this is not important, don't look into it. Some other people may tell you like there's a good justification for you not to spend time on these or to be spending time on something else. And at the time, it can be a bit challenging to push back and say, look, I've listened to obviously everyone who gives you advice, especially people you trust and you rate. But at the end of the day, go with your instinct and sweat the small stuff if you think that the small stuff is important, because sometimes it can really make a difference further down the line. And there are examples where doing things in a certain way early on saved us from consequences, adverse consequences for the businesses later on. So I'm saying, if you feel that your attention, after having thought about it and listened to advice, if you feel that certain stuff needs your attention, just go with it and be the best version of yourself and apply your skills to that particular area, because you hear many voices, and at the end of the day, you need to be probably a little bit more confident than I was at the time in pursuing that direction, without the arrogance, but definitely with the right level of conviction. Number two, I would say, don't sweat the small stuff, but don't dwell too much on mistakes. Learn from them. Take the
Yeah.
opportunity to, whether it's your mistakes or mistakes of someone in your team or mistakes that the organization made, just move on and make sure that that you don't repeat that mistake again. As Ray Dalio said, I think it's okay to make mistakes, but it's not okay not to learn from them. So just do your best, learn from every opportunity you get, including from mistakes, and then move on. Everyone will make mistakes, especially with a level of complexity, and just make sure they don't happen again. And I think, to condense it all, is at the end of the day, do enjoy the ride, because it is a ride,
Yeah.
a journey. Some people say it's a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, in my company, I attended a talk from a co-founder of Mambu, a Dutch scale-up, last weekend, and he used this expression. It's a marathon of a sprint, because it is both a marathon, because ideally you want the role to last and the company to last long enough.
Yeah.
But there are many sprints within the marathon. There are certain times in which you need to move fast, right? And I think if you start rejecting that and thinking this is not normal, you will just suffer. So embrace it, enjoy the ride, and take every opportunity you can to learn and to expose yourself to new challenges, to get out of your comfort zone. The imposter syndrome is actually a good thing from a certain perspective, because it means that you're getting exposed to things that you've never seen before, to people that are ideally smarter than you. And so that's so good. It's uncomfortable. It's so good. I mean, a quote that I love is from a Ted Lasso show, and I repeat this to myself, which is it's a bit of a silly quote. It says, taking on a challenge is a little bit like riding a horse, isn't it? If you feel comfortable while doing it, you're probably doing it wrong. And so it means for me that, like, if
Yeah.
I am feeling a little bit uncomfortable, out of my comfort space and so on, I'm probably in the right path. I'm probably, obviously, with the right support mechanism. I'm probably where I want to be, where I keep learning and I keep things interesting. So that's it.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I love, well, and nothing like a good Ted Lasso quote as well. But I love the enjoy the ride as well. It's a stressful job. It can be a lonely job as well, definitely. And that's where, networking, talking to your peers, listening to things like this, it's good to get some confirmation sometimes that you're not crazy, and what you're doing is, everyone's having these same challenges and feeling these same pressures. But yeah, enjoy it as you go. They can be really career defining roles and foundationally very, very interesting as well. So no, look, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. As always, I'm very grateful for your time, and yeah, it just leaves me to say, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for taking the time to do this, and I'll catch up with you again very soon.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for having me, and best of luck with everything. Keep up the good work.
Thanks so much.